Okay, so you should be able to see where we're getting started at Genesis 1 and 14. And last week, again, just a quick recap, we talked about days 1 through 3, uh, where he created the heaven and the earth. He created light. He created the firmament, which is the sky. And then he created the land and created the seas. And at the end of day 3, he created the first living things, which were the plants. But he only did that after he had created everything that they would need to live, that being the oxygen in the atmosphere, the sky, the dirt that they had to grow out of, and the water that they needed. So he didn't create anything that needed to live until he created what they needed to be able to live. So now we start day 4. And some people kind of say, look at creation and say you can divide it in, at least the description of creation that's in scripture. And they talk about how you can divide it into 3 groups, 3 groupings. The first 3 days, when he was creating things basically out of nothing. Then days 4 and 5, well, 4, 5, and 6, actually, when he took the material things that he had already created and he reorganized them into new things that were being created. And then day 7, which is the day he rested. So you can look at it as creation comes in two sets of 3 days and then a single day. But other people divide it a little bit differently. They talk about days 1 through 4, as in this was when all the material things were created in the universe. And then days 5 and 6 were again taking the material that was created in the first 4 days and reorganizing to create living things like animals and man. So either one of those is a way to look at creation. Instead of looking at it as a full 6 days or a full 7 days without a break, you can see that God actually did have a little bit of organization in the way he was creating things. He created all the material things, I'd say in the first 4 days, because there were some things that after day 3 hadn't been created yet, but they were created in day 4. And then in day 5 and day 6, he used the dust of the ground to create animals and man. So let's jump into verse 14, talking about day 4. And I was talking to Julia right before we got started, and I'm saying I think we may only get through day 4 today or tonight, because there's a lot of material there because of what it's talking about. So in verse 14, it says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And as I said before, one way to think of days 4 through 6 is that God took the raw materials that he had called into existence the first 3 days and formed them into new finished products. So even though he created light on day 1, on day 4, he took that general light that was created and he formed specific individual lights from it. And we'll see that what some of those individual lights were. But there was just general light from starting in day 1 through day 3. It was divided from the darkness, but it was just, there was light on one side, there was darkness on the other side. And now he's going to take that, and he's going to take that light and form it into things that are recognizable today. And in this first verse, verse 14, we see that one of the reasons that he did that was to establish times and seasons. Now, I'll ask before we dig into this, just if anybody has the understanding, or what do you think about how the lights in the sky define times and seasons? It says for days and years and seasons and signs. So what does that mean to you?
Well, it talks about it means that the moon rotates around the earth.
Right.
The earth rotates around the sun, and that sets the time,
Correct.
So
Yeah, that's good. That's a main part of it.
right.
The, the moon establishes, well, if we just think of the moon itself, it establishes days, it establishes weeks, it establishes months,
Months.
and it also can establish hours. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on. But yeah, all of that is true. And and before we had what would be atomic clocks or quartz clocks or any type of electronic timepieces, really what we used to determine days, weeks, hours, minutes was the lights in the sky, whether it was the sun in the daytime or the moon at night, or even the stars. All of them had their role to play. And we'll dig into that a little bit further. But somebody would like to say something?
No, I think I was just going to say what you just said, because before the clocks were invented, that's how man, especially indigenous people,
Right.
told time and seasons. And see, they went by the elements, the sun and the moon and the stars, and
Right.
to set, when it was time to plant, when it was time to harvest. The early explorers, when they would set sail to go in search of whatever, they used the moon and the stars for direction.
Right. Absolutely, that's true. And so all of that was established on day 4. And so what I'd say here is that besides simply providing illumination, the sun, the moon, and the stars were given another important purpose. Even though we use digital watches and atomic clocks and calendars to keep track of them today, the relative motions of the sun, moon, and stars are still the basis for our modern system of timekeeping. And so I give some examples here. We talk about the rising and setting of the sun is the main way we mark the passage of days. Now, does anybody know in scripture what marks a day? And it's actually covered in Genesis chapter 1. How is a day marked in scripture?
Well, I think it's that the lighter light marks a day, I guess, for the sun, and then the lesser light, well, I guess it marks the night.
Right, that's true. They rule. Well, the greater light rules the day, and the lesser light rules the night. But the question I'm asking is, in Scripture, when does a day start?
When the sun rises?
That's the way we do it today, but that's not the biblical start.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, actually the night. So like that, I think we marked it, or they marked it down. It's like 6 p.m. So it starts actually, a night starts, and then goes through the day. So it goes from night to night.
Correct. Now, why is that? Let's go back a little bit. In fact, I don't think I have it here. We'd have to go all the way back to verse 13. So I'm not going to go back there. But what you'll notice is if you read the Genesis account in chapter 1, after each description of what happened during the day, it describes that day. And what does it say? It says, and the evening and the morning were the
First day.
day, second day, third day, fourth day. So biblically, the day starts with the evening, followed by the morning, or the daytime. And then another day starts with the next evening. Why is that?
I think it has what it is when he created it. There was darkness before there was light.
Correct. That's it. That's the answer. The very first day set the tone. And before he created light, there was darkness. So the light followed the darkness in the first day. So from that point forward, every day began with the light being extinguished and the darkness followed by the light. So biblically, a day starts at evening, followed by morning in the daytime, and it ends at the next evening, which is the start of the next day. And that's still the way that the officially the Jewish calendar works. So they don't mark days beginning with sunup. And point of fact, we don't really either. We kind of say we do, but the beginning of the day actually is not when the sun comes up. A day officially starts, even for us, at a second past midnight. And the day is already 6, 7 hours old by the time the sun comes up. So for us, the night and the morning are a day, but it's not, a day doesn't start with the rising of the sun. Our work day may start with the rising of the sun, but the day is already well along before that happens.
Well, you know, in different parts of the world, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah, well, again, we're talking specifically that from a biblical standpoint, the day starts at evening. But yeah, in different places in the world, we have different times when we start the day. But in the Western world, we officially, a day starts at a second after midnight, wherever you are. Now, midnight is a different time for different people. So like, especially for instance, like the New Year, if you watch any of the New Year shows where they ring in the New Year, you can sit there and watch the New Year start 24 different times if you want to watch it that way, because there's 24 different time zones in the world, and each one of them has its own separate time when the year starts. So by the time it's New Year's at one point on the globe, there's another place where it's already the 2nd of January. Just because of the way the earth rotates and the way the times are established by the time zones. Now that wasn't always the case, but as we got to the point where we could travel long distances, we realized that we needed to establish times, because otherwise everybody would be basing things on wherever they were locally. And in fact, back in the, primarily in the 1800s, especially here in the United States, when they started having railroads that could carry you long distances, they realized that the only way that they could make railroads work is they had to standardize the time across the country. Because even if you move as much as, say, a couple of 100 miles in either direction, you change the way time runs from a solar standpoint. We talked about the sun, and sundials marking hours. If you move as much as a couple of 100 miles, it may be sun directly overhead in one place, and a couple of 100 miles away, the sun isn't quite there yet. And so if that person 200 miles away, their clock wouldn't say it was noon, when the clock in this other place said it was. And so if you were waiting for a train to get there at 12 o'clock your time, that train may be on the other time and it may be 12:20 for them, and you already missed the train. So that's why they had to standardize the time and say, everybody in this 1,000-mile block has the same time, regardless of whether the sun's directly overhead at 12 o'clock or not. For you, it's 12 o'clock. And then for the next block over, it's only 11 o'clock. Then for the next one over, it's only 10 o'clock. But it still all goes back to where the sun is in the sky. So the rising and the setting of the sun defines a day. And then I say the steady movement of the sun across the sky or the moon across the nighttime sky mark hours and minutes. And a lot of people don't realize it. Most people have heard of sundials, that you can mark hours during the daytime as the shadow moves on the sundial. You can say that an hour has passed when it's moved this much. But they also have what are called moon dials, which do the same thing, but at night, because the moon can cast a shadow too. It's not as strong as the sun. And there's some nights when you can't use a moon dial because there is no moon. But on nights when there's a good strong moon, you can tell time by what's called a moon dial, just like a sundial. So the movement of the sun or the moon marks hours and minutes. And then another example I give is that if you live near a coastline, this is still based on the sun and the moon, you can use the tides to determine days and hours and times. Because the tides are caused by the movement of the sun and the moon. They pull on the water that's directly underneath them and make it rise up. And so as the moon goes around, then the bulge in the water that it's pulling on goes around the earth to follow it. Same thing with the sun. So you can use the tides to tell months and years and days as well. And then we have the moon and its phases. They can count weeks and months. And I go into some detail here. But the bottom line is that the word month itself comes from the moon. It's one moon. In fact, back when I was a kid, we used to watch the old Western TV shows with the Indians, and the Indian talked about things happening many moons ago. And technically they were correct because a moon is essentially a month, approximately. It's actually 28, 29 days, but that's close enough for government work, as they say, to what we call a month nowadays. That's where we get the word from. And so between a full moon and the next full moon is about 28 days. Or between the new moon, and the new moon was always a term that I thought was kind of strange, because a new moon doesn't mean that the moon is new. The new moon means that the moon is not there. The night when there is no moon is called new moon.
Really?
Yes. So if you go out at night and you don't see the moon, that's the night of new moon. It's the darkest night of any month. And so the number of days between new moon and new moon is also 28 days or a month. So you can count a month either from full moon to full moon or from new moon to new moon. For the Jews, they counted from new moon to new moon. That's a month for them. Now, so we've got a month defined by the moon. You could also define a half month by the moon. A half month is a time between any full moon and any new moon, either before or after. So you got a new moon, and then 14 days later, you'll have a full moon. That's 2 weeks. And then 14 days after that, you'll have another new moon. And 14 days after that, another full moon. So you can count 2 weeks by counting between full moons and new moons. But you can also count weeks. And a week is counting either from a full moon or a new moon, either one. You can take your pick. 7 days later, there will be a half moon, when you'll be able to see exactly half of the moon in the sky. Sometimes it'll be a half moon moving towards a full moon. Sometimes it'll be a half moon moving towards a new moon. But either way, it's 7 days. So now you can define weeks, half months, and full months simply by looking at the phase of the moon. From new moon to half moon, 7 days, 1 week. From that half moon to the full moon, another 7 days, another week. From that full moon to the next half moon, another 7 days, another week. And then from that half moon to the next new moon, that's now another week or another 7 days, and a total now of 1 month.
So
So
new
you
moon.
need a calendar. You just need to know that. Now you may not know what calendar date it is, but you know you've gone through a month just by watching the sky and looking at the moon at night. Go ahead. Somebody had a question or a comment?
What is a crescent? A crescent, is that a number of days?
Yes, each one of those is you said, is that a number of days?
Right. The quarter moon, the crescent.
Crescent moon.
Crescent moon. Well, the crescent moon is actually the phase of the moon between the new moon and the half moon, or between the half moon and the next new moon. So it's actually all of those 7 days, it's some level of a crescent. So there's crescent moons for 7 days after the new moon before you get to the half moon. You get what I'm saying?
So they're markers and indicators in between a full moon and a half moon.
Right.
That would be
about 3.5 days, something like that.
Well, no. What I'm saying is, okay, you start off with a new moon. There's no moon there. The next night, there's a small crescent moon. That's the first day after the new moon. The second night, it's still a crescent moon, but it's a bigger crescent. The third night, it's a bigger crescent, but it's still a crescent moon. And that continues until the 7th night, when you got a half moon. So you've got 7 days of crescent moons. It's just each night they're getting bigger.
Right.
And that's called a waxing moon. A waxing moon is when it's getting bigger, heading towards a full moon. Now, when you get to a half moon, then the next night, it's not a crescent anymore. It's a half moon plus a sliver. So it's not round, but it kind of looks like football shaped or something, just lopsided on one side. And it keeps getting bigger like that, adding more onto that half until you get to a full moon. And then it starts getting smaller from the opposite side. So you start getting a crescent cut out of the full moon, and then a bigger crescent cut out of the full moon until you get to the half moon again. So from new moon to full moon, it's called a waxing moon. And then from full moon towards the new moon, it's called a waning moon. So if you ever hear waxing or waning moon, that's what it means. Waxing just means that you're on your way from the new moon towards the full moon. And once you get to the full moon, then it switches from waxing to waning, meaning it's getting smaller. Waxing means getting larger, waning means getting smaller. But there's not a specific single time when there is a crescent moon. It's just every night until you get to the half moon. Go ahead, Deacon.
So what does from new moon to full moon, what does that indicate?
That's just the first half of the month, nothing more. From new moon to full moon is the first half of the month.
So you're either going to start to mark times either from a new moon or a full moon, depending on where you start.
Right. And that's why I say for the Jews, they mark it from the new moon. So from the new moon to the full moon is the first half of the month. That's all that means. It's just the first half of the month. Now, and then from the first half of the month, from the full moon to the next new moon, that's the second half of the month. If you were a Roman, you'd called the first half of the month the Ides, and the second half of the month the Calends. Calends. That's why we get our word calendar. But that there's no, I guess, are you asking what is the significance of it? There's really no necessarily significance to it other than it just marks that time. And again, that's what God did it for, so we'd be able to mark the passage of time. And the reason it's important to mark the passage of time is because, well, it gets back to something we were talking about last week. As long as the earth remains, there'll be seed time and harvest. So we have to be able to mark the passage of time to know when to plant seed and when to harvest. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. We're almost there. Because that's basically not the moon and the sun, but the stars. Go ahead.
I don't want to dwell on it that long, but it's the sun or the tide. When the tide comes in, that means the sun is going down, and when it goes out, it means the sun is going up, it's rising.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. You'd have to have a tide almanac to tell you at what time things are happening. But there's actually a couple of tides per day, one based on the sun and one based on the moon.
Oh, okay.
And they're on opposite sides of the earth. And even though I said it's when the sun's overhead, it's really not exactly when it's overhead. They kind of lag behind the sun and the moon. So the sun comes up and the tide comes up a little bit after it. So what you'll see a lot of times is if you look at an almanac of the tides, it'll say what time sunrise is, and the high tide will be a little bit after that. And then they have what's called the neap tide, which is a lower tide based on the moon. So the moon will come up, and then there'll be another tide that follows it. And interestingly enough, it's not just on the side of the earth where the sun and the moon are. There's also a tide on the exact opposite side of the earth. So when it's high tide on one side of the earth, it's high tide on the exact opposite side of the earth where there is no sun.
Right. I know when I go fishing, I look in the paper and see when the tide is coming in and when it's going out. And it's different all the time.
Right. And what you're talking about there is, remember I was saying that there's a tide that's actually on the opposite side. So you do get tides at night.
Right.
And that's because it's that tide on the opposite side of the earth where the sun is shining.
Right.
So they're 12 hours apart approximately, but not exactly. So you have to look. That's why you have to have that almanac to tell you exactly when it is.
Right. And it's kind of complex with that tide.
Yeah, it is.
The moon. Yeah.
But you can calculate it after you do some observation and And that's what we've been doing as human beings for thousands of years, is we've been observing and writing stuff down. So now we can calculate that based on historical records, knowing that this much time after the sun comes up is when that tide's going to be, or this many hours later, 12 hours later, there's going to be another tide like it, just not as high, because the tide that's on the opposite side of the earth, it's a high tide, but it's a lower high tide than the one where the sun's shining.
Yep, they bring the fish in.
Yep, yep. But I didn't think we were going to, I didn't realize we were going to get into that, but that's interesting that we did.
That's interesting to me because
yeah, if you're a big fisherman, I guess it is. But again, that's all based on God's plan. We see it already right here. Knowing when to fish was established on day 4. You can say that. If you want to know when to fish, you can thank God putting the sun, moon in the sky and saying that they were for times and seasons into the sky on day 4.
Amen.
Okay, the next one I got is positions of the stars in the sky, or actually groupings of stars called constellations. Those mark the seasons. That's what I was talking about earlier, knowing when to plant and when to harvest. And there's certain constellations that are visible in the spring and others that are visible in the summer, fall, or winter. And some that are visible all the time. Like, for instance, for us, well, it depends on what hemisphere you're in. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we see a whole different set of constellations than the people in the Southern Hemisphere do. And they see constellations that we will never get to see unless you travel below the equator. And we see ones that they'll never get to see unless they travel north of the equator. But wherever you are, you can use those constellations to tell you not necessarily what time it is or what day of the month it is, but to tell you what season it is. Is it spring? Is it summer? Is it winter? Is it fall? Like, for instance, right now in the Northern Hemisphere, anybody ever heard of the constellation Orion?
Yep.
Yep. Orion, the hunter with his 3 stars in his belt.
Yep.
Orion is a fall and winter constellation. So when you see Orion, you know it's time to get ready to harvest your crops. When he disappears is in the springtime. So when he disappears, you know it's about time to start planting your crops again. So in ancient times, that was a lot of what they used to determine when things would happen, like planting crops and harvesting them. Or other rituals, because they had other rituals as well that depended on the constellations. And then this last one is, how do we determine a year? Because we've got hours with sundials and moon dials. We've got weeks with the phases of the moon. We got months with phases of the moon. We got seasons with the constellations. The only thing that's left now is, how do we determine a year? And the way you determine a year is that you might not have ever noticed it, but the ancients eventually did, and they kept track of it. The sun does not rise at the same place every day. In fact, every day it rises a little bit different place than it did the day before. And if you trace it out, what you'll notice is it forms a figure 8 if you keep track of it. And if wherever you start in that figure 8, if you track where the sun rises until it gets back to that same spot that you started from, that's exactly 1 year has passed. So that's why you have things like Stonehenge, or like the temples there down in that the Incas had, where you have things that line up once a year. And so when everything lines up, you see a shadow at this very point. Or the Incas, was the Incas or the Mayas? They had the temple where on 1 day a year, the shadow of the steps of the temple makes the form of a snake sliding down the side of the temple. And so they knew, just from the time I see that snake until the next time I see that snake, there's exactly 1 year has passed. So now we can see that everything that's in the sky, God placed there to allow us to be able to tell time. Any questions about any of that?
What did you say about the figure eight at first?
Yeah, if you track the place on the horizon where the sun rises every day, you keep track of it, it traces out a figure eight. If you got an old map or maybe sometimes even an old globe, you can actually sometimes in the legend of old maps or old globes, world maps or globes, they'll have that figure eight drawn. But it's making a dot each day for 365 days or where the sun rose, and it forms a figure eight.
Yeah, but the sun, but the Earth rotates around the sun. I thought it was all pretty symmetrical, but I guess not.
No, it's not, because okay, we're getting complicated now. The Earth is on a 23.5-degree tilt.
Oh,
It doesn't, if the axis of the Earth was straight up and down, no tilt, then the sun would rise, and you drew where the sun rose, you get a perfect circle. But because it's on a tilt, as you go around, sometimes you're pointing towards the sun, and that's called spring and summer. And sometimes you're pointing away from the sun, and that's called fall and winter. And so it's because of that tilt that you get the figure eight drawn on when you trace the sunrise.
Right.
So it's based on the 23-degree tilt of the Earth's axis, which is also what gives us our seasons. We would not have seasons if it weren't for that tilt.
Right.
It would always be, the weather would always be the same, 365 days a year. Whatever it was yesterday, it's going to be like that tomorrow, and 3 months from now, and 6 months from now. Now, that doesn't mean that it's exactly the same everywhere on the Earth, because there will still be parts of the Earth that are closer to the sun than others. For instance, the equator is always going to be hotter because it's closer to the sun. And the poles are always going to be colder if there's no tilt. In fact, you can get to the point where you can have ice caps on the poles, and they could technically never get sunlight. If you have a planet that has zero tilt on its axis, the poles would never get any sun because the sun's coming in this way. So what's up here isn't going to get any sunlight.
Didn't Alaska have 30 days of night?
Yes, that's when, if the sun's here and they're tilted, that 30 days of night is when they're tilted like this. Now, when they come over here, now they're tilted towards. So that's when they get the 30 days when the sun almost never sets. In fact, I've been in Alaska during that time of year where, and it depends on how far north you are. In the farthest north, there's 6 months of daylight and 6 months of sun, of darkness. But as you get further away, you get to the places where I was when I went to Alaska, the 2 times I went, I was at a place where on one day a year, June the 22nd, June the 21st, that is in most of the world, that's still, in the Northern Hemisphere, that's the longest day of the year. In Alaska, it really is the longest day of the year because it's the day when the sun doesn't set. Now, leading up to that, there were nights where I was there where you got the sun and you got the horizon. The sun would do this, and then it would immediately come right back up. So the sun went down for about a minute and a half, and then it rose again. But on that June the 21st, it went like this. Oh, this is the horizon. Make sure you can see it. This is the sun. It touched the horizon and it went straight back up again. It never went below it. And it's just the opposite in the southern hemisphere. And we were in Brazil during Christmas time in 2003. And for us in the northern hemisphere, December is the middle of winter, but for them, it's the middle of summer. So they celebrate Christmas. It's 90, 95, 100 degrees down.
Like it is in Houston sometimes.
Yeah, looks like it's gonna be that way.
Yeah.
Terrible.
It's like that here sometimes.
Yeah. Well, this year it seemed like it's going to be a warm Christmas season everywhere in the United States.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know.
But we've gotten now through talking about the days, well, hours, days, weeks, months, seasons, and years. And that was one reason that the lights are in the sky. And then in verse 15, it says, let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light unto the earth. And it was so. And I just think it's interesting that when he talks about why the lights are there, the first thing is not to give light. The first thing is to mark days, weeks, months, years, seasons. The second reason they're there is to give light. That just was always interesting to me. So I'm not going to read all of this. Let's go down. And we're going to start at verse 16 now. We're going to talk about these lights in a little bit more detail. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And that always kind of seemed funny to me. Poor stars, they just kind of, yeah, and he made some stars too.
Threw them in as an afterthought, right?
Yeah. But what's the greater light and what's the lesser light?
Two great lights.
Yes, two great lights. Well, what are the two great lights then?
Sun and the moon.
Sun and the
Sun and the
moon.
moon. Okay. So which is the greater and which is the lesser?
Let's see.
I vote for the sun being the greater.
Okay. And I think the verse agrees with you. It says the greater light rules the day. And the lesser light rules the night. So the sun is up during the daytime, the moon is up during the night. Now, is the moon actually a source of light?
I don't think so. I think the moon gets its light from the sun.
Okay. Anybody disagree?
I don't know.
So if the moon did make its own light, why would there be nights when you don't see any light? Because it doesn't make its own light, as Larry said. It reflects the light of the sun. So in that respect, we can see the moon almost as representative of each one of us, and the sun representative of God the Father and God the Son. They are the source of light, and any light that's in us is nothing more than reflected light from them. We don't generate any of our own light, any of our own goodness, any of our own righteousness. It's given to us by God the Father and God the Son. So that's one way we can see of our relationship to the Godhead is they are the sun, we are the moon. Everybody see that? Now that's not written here. I just threw that in.
That's pretty unique.
So there's only one sun and only one moon, but How many stars do you think there are? Without reading this.
We don't know.
Too many to count.
Too many to count, yes. So why did God tell Abraham to go out of his tent and count them?
Why did he tell Abraham what?
To go out of his tent and look up and count the stars. Why do you do that if you can't count them?
So he could realize how many of his seeds would be on earth.
Perfect answer, yes. Because he didn't say count them. He says, count them if you can. Because that was where Abraham was doubting whether or not God was going to keep his promise and give him a seed. And he says, I'm not just going to give you a seed, I'm going to give you lots of seeds. And if you want to know how many, step outside, look up at the sky, and try to count the stars. If you can count how many stars there are, then you can count how many seeds you're going to have. But if you can't, that means that you can't even count how many seeds you're going to have. But science has tried to make an estimate of how many there are. Now, and it depends on how you look at it. The first way of looking at it is, I've seen estimates that say if you got far enough away from the light of cities to where you could actually see the stars, because if you're in a city, you can't see very many stars at all because there's too much light pollution, they call it. And so it masks all the stars that are there. But if you got out away from the cities so that you could see the stars, there's some estimates that say that you'd be able to see 3,000 to 5,000 in the sky, visible stars with your naked eye. But if you took a telescope, you could see a lot more. And the stronger the telescope, the more stars you could see. And then the second way to look at it is some estimates say that in the Milky Way galaxy, which is where we live, there are anywhere from 100 billion to 200 billion to even some people say 1 trillion stars. That's a lot of stars. And they say that we're not the only galaxy, and there's 200 billion to 1 trillion galaxies. Now, we can't see all of those, but each one of them has the same number of stars. So there's a whole bunch of them, a lot of stars.
Mentioned, you had mentioned about being out in the away from the city. I went to Fort Davis, the McDonald Observatory. They have these star parties, but
yep.
Yeah, it is totally different at night. I mean, you can see. I can just imagine what Abraham, he couldn't count it, because even just from there, you can see it's all kinds of totally different. It's pitch dark, but the sky is just full.
Yeah, I know when I was a kid, we could see a lot more stars than I can see here in El Paso. You could barely see any stars around here, but sky full of stars when I was a kid if you went outside. Okay, so where do we go from here? Oh, that's a good statement. Even though there's so many stars in existence, trillions and quadrillions and quintillions, depending on how you count it, the Bible tells us that God's aware of every one of the stars and that each one of them has a name that he knows. It says, he telleth the number of the stars, he calleth them by their name. Psalms 147:4. So they just again points out the omniscience of God. That he's smart enough to know not just how many stars are, but know the names of every one of them. That means he knows when one of them blinks out and disappears, and he knows when another one's created, because the stars are not static. Every day there's a star that's being created, and every day there's a star that's being destroyed, that's blowing up or dying or burning out. They don't stay the same. But he knows them. He knows them by name. He knows how many there are. Just like he knows and numbers the hairs on your head, he knows and knows the names of all the stars that are in the sky. Okay. This is talking about, in this section, light's very important in scripture, and the lights formed on day 4 all have significance. Just as the general light created on day 1 symbolically represents goodness and righteousness, the word of God and the children of God, and Jesus, the sun, moon, and stars created on day 4 have different meanings throughout scripture, depending on what verse you're reading. In Genesis and Revelation, the sun, moon, and a group of 11 or 12 stars represents the nation of Israel. That's from Genesis chapter 37, where Joseph talked about the dream that he had and told it to his brothers, that he saw the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars that all bowed down to him. And then over in Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about the woman who had the sun, she stood on the moon and she had the sun and 12 stars that were around her head. And that represents the nation of Israel as well. Oh, there it is. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and on her head a crown of 12 stars. That's Revelation 12:1. So both of those represent the nation of Israel, sun, moon, and 12 stars. But stars also represent the angels of heaven. And we talked about this verse last week, I believe. Yeah. When the morning stars sang together, the angels, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job 38:7. That's what we were talking about. The first thing that was created was not the heaven and the earth. And Julia, this is something that you missed last week that we talked about. Before God created, when God created the heaven and the earth, Job 38:7 says that the angels were there watching and singing. So that meant that the first thing that was created was not the heaven and the earth, it was the angels, because they were already there when he created the heaven and the earth. So stars, and we just talked about this one, also represent the seed of Abraham. And then outside of the Bible, we know that the sun, the moon, and the stars have been worshiped as deities for millennia. And ancient peoples all over the world always created gods that were represented by the sun, by the moon, by different constellations, even by individual stars. We're going to skip over a lot of that. We talked about this already. For primitive humans, they also noticed that 2 days closely coincided with the day when the plants blossomed in the spring and when the crops ripened in the fall. Those were the equinoxes. Those were the days when there's just as much daylight as there is nighttime. And so they knew when those days arrived, it was about time to plant and about time to harvest. And so I say here that because of all the associations they made between what was going on in the sky with the sun, moon, and the stars, ancient peoples began to believe that things on the earth were actually controlled by the sun, the moon, and the stars. That's where we get what's called astrology today, because they believe that your future was controlled by what went on with your stars or with your planets. So it's not a big leap from recognizing important correspondences between earthly events and celestial ones, and concluding that the celestial events, what's going on in the sky, and especially the celestial objects associated with those events, were in control of earthly events. If the plants on earth came to life, grew, mature, and die in accordance with the movements of the sun, then they believe that the sun must be in control of the plants. And it's these types of observations of the skies and their relationships with events on earth that cause practically every human culture and religion to deify and anthropomorphize, that means to make like humans, the sun, the moon, and the stars and constellations. So I've got some examples here. The sun in many ancient religions was worshipped as the greatest of the gods and often was the king or the father of all of the other gods. And some important ancient sun gods include Helios, who is the ancient Greek sun god, Amun or Amun-Ra, who is the ancient Egyptian sun god, or Ra, Malak Bel, who is the ancient Arabian sun god, Huitzli-Lapochtli, that's it. That's a hard one, was the Aztec sun god. Shaphash was the Canaanite sun god. Sol was the Norse sun god. And Apollo was the ancient Roman sun god. And in most cases, they were either the father of all the gods or one of the chief gods, because the sun was always very important to the ancients. And then they also had moon gods, but most of the time the moon was not a god, but was a goddess. So you see a lot of moon goddesses. And what you see here is that the ancient Greeks actually had 4 different moon goddesses: Phoebe, Artemis, Selene, and Hecate. And the ancient Romans had 3. One of them is the name that we use for the moon now. There's Diana, Trivia. By the way, Trivia is the name of the moon. And Luna, which is the name that we give to the moon. We talk about the lunar surface. We talk about lunar this and lunar that. That's from the ancient Roman goddess, who was a goddess of the moon. And then Sin is the ancient Mesopotamian or Akkadian moon goddess. And then I say occasionally individual stars were worshipped as gods, but usually it was groupings of stars, what we call constellations, that were deified. And so here's some of those. Ganymede, which is another name for Aquarius, the water bearer. He was a god, but it's also a constellation. We talked about Orion, the hunter. He was one of the ancient Greek gods, also a constellation. Ophiuchus, or the snake handler, which, by the way, if you don't know who Ophiuchus is, but if you've seen anything recently, just within the last few months, I've seen stuff online talking about changing the dates of the zodiac and adding back in the 13th zodiac sign. The 13th zodiac sign is Ophiuchus, the snake handler. So if you hadn't seen that, you can look it up, 13th zodiac, and it'll talk about Ophiuchus, and it'll talk about the new dates of the new zodiac. I'm not a big zodiac fan, of course, but some people believe it's in the Bible, and so we'll look at that before we get out of here. I think we might get to that. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, we should have time to get to that before we get out of here tonight. How the zodiac is discussed in Scripture. Okay, so one of the most widespread and enduring beliefs about the effects of the celestial bodies is that they also determine the personality traits of human beings. That's the zodiac. Many ancient religions and philosophies held that a person's individual behavioral traits, as well as their belief systems, likes, dislikes, biases, etc., were dependent on which of 12 constellations the sun rose in on the day that they were born. In the Near East and the West, these 12 constellations are collectively called the zodiac. And individual constellations are called zodiac signs. So you got the Western zodiac, which has things like Capricorn and Sagittarius and Gemini and Aquarius and Virgo. But then you also have the Chinese zodiac, which are a different set of animals. They're different, but the same idea, that depending on when you were born, and originally it was supposed to be what sign that the sun rose in. Remember I said that the sun rises in a different place on the horizon each day. And if the path that the sun goes through is the path of the zodiac, the constellation. So depending on which constellation the sun rose in, determine your zodiac sign. But because there's actually supposed to be 13 of them and not 12, they don't match up anymore. And so what used to be one sign back when they first created them is now a different sign, but that's neither here nor there. Now, the bottom line is that they believe that based on your zodiac sign or when you were born, it determined what your personality was going to be like. It would determine things like who you should marry, who you shouldn't marry, who you should be friends with, how you would act. All of these types of things were determined simply by what stars were in the sky on the day you were born. That's the idea of the zodiac. So the pseudoscience of determining the effects of these constellations of the sun, moon, and the stars is called astrology, which literally means star study. In determining the effects on an individual or group, either on a specific day or for a period of time, like a week, month, or a year, is called casting their horoscope. And horoscope is from oros, which means hour, and scope meaning view. So a view of your hour, as in looking at what's going to happen. Even today, many people still read their horoscopes, published in newspapers, magazines, or online every day, week, or month. They know their own zodiac signs and ask those they meet to reveal their sign. That used to be a big thing, especially back in the 60s and 70s. What's your sign? They may even base their relationships or lack of relationships with each other on whether their relationship zodiac signs are considered to be compatible. So they have pairs of signs that say, if you're this sign, that your best match is somebody from this other sign. Usually, most of the time, you're not supposed to marry somebody of the same sign, but you're supposed to marry somebody of an opposite sign. That's typically what they say. And there are some who propose that the zodiac can be found within the pages of the Bible, especially in Jacob's prophetic descriptions of his 12 sons at the end of his life, which is in Genesis chapter 49. So this is a table that I created that talks about the characteristics of each of the 12 tribes and the 12 sons. And one of the things I captured on there is one of the associations of the 12 sons, the 12 tribes, with the individual zodiac signs. A lot of them, it's easy to understand that association. There's a couple of them, though, that it's kind of shaky at best, but we'll go through those and you'll see that. Now, Reuben is associated with the Aquarius, the water bearer. That's because what Jacob said about him was Reuben was as variable as water. So he became associated with the water bearer. Simeon and Levi, they were discussed together as one. So they're associated with Pisces, the two fish. Judah was described as a lion's whelp or a young lion. So he's associated, of course, with Leo. So those kind of make sense, all four of them. Then some of these others, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I can understand it. But some of them, it's way out there. Now, Dan is described as a poisonous snake hiding on the side of the road, waiting to strike. So he's associated with a zodiac sign of an animal that's poisonous and it waits on the side of the road to strike, that being Scorpio the scorpion. Naphtali is described as a roe deer or a female deer. So Naphtali is associated with the only female zodiac sign, which is Virgo. All the other zodiac signs are male. Gad is described as living in tents, like a troop of soldiers. So he's associated with Aries, the god of war, soldiers and war. Makes sense. Asher is described as a goblet or a tree. So he's associated with Libra. That's because in olden days, you had those scales that had something like a cup, like a goblet, where you'd put something on one side and measure it against something on the other side. So that's the association there. It makes sense as well. But when we get to some of these down here at the bottom, you'll see that some of these connections don't quite make sense. Here's the first one, Issachar. Issachar was described as a wild donkey. And for some reason, he's associated with the zodiac sign of Cancer. And I think it's because once they had made the obvious connections, they were left with a couple of them. And so they just stuck them on the last two sons that were left and says, okay, you take that one and you take the other one. Zebulun, his makes sense. It talks about Zebulun coming down to the sea in ships. So he's associated with Capricorn, the sea goat, because ships are, of course, are on the sea. Now, there is no zodiac sign for Joseph because the zodiac signs are associated with his two sons. So we'll see those in a minute. Benjamin is another one of, I think, one of those other two, Issachar and Benjamin being the two that they couldn't figure out where to put them. So they just gave him what was left. So Benjamin was described by Jacob as a wolf, a ravening wolf. And for whatever reason, he's associated with Gemini. That makes sense. So Issachar and Benjamin, I think, were the leftovers because the others, I can see the connection. All right, the last two, the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim was described as a bull or a unicorn, but of course a bull is Taurus. And Manasseh is described as an olive branch and a quiver of arrows. So he's associated with Sagittarius, the archer. So you see that for those 10, there's a good, it makes good sense to associate it with the zodiac, but for a couple of them, it does not. I personally don't understand Benjamin or Issachar, but the rest of them, it makes sense to say that you see the zodiac there. So anybody got any questions of any of that?
What's the meaning of the blessings and curses?
Oh, well, let's go up to the top and you'll see it. Blessings and curses are in Deuteronomy chapter 27, actually 27 and 28. When they got to the very edge of the promised land, when Moses had taken them there, before they went in, he divided them up into two groups of 6 and had them stand on the top of the mountains looking over. And he declared blessings on 6 of the tribes and curses on the other 6. So you see that Dan, well, let's go back up all the way up to the top. Oh, that is the top, or is it? Reuben, okay. Reuben was cursed, Simeon blessed, Levi blessed, Judah was blessed. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were cursed. Issachar was blessed, Zebulun was cursed, and Joseph was blessed and Benjamin was blessed. So that means if Joseph was blessed, then his 2 sons were also blessed. But it doesn't show them because they aren't mentioned, but they're in Joseph. So Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed through their father Joseph. So you got to go to Deuteronomy chapter 27 and chapter 28, where they're standing on the mountaintop and see that which ones were blessed and which ones were cursed.
Okay, go back up to Virgo.
Say again?
Go back up to Virgo.
Up to Virgo. Naphtali is Virgo. Again, Naphtali is Virgo because Jacob described Naphtali as a roe or a female deer. So the roe, the female deer, is associated with the only female zodiac sign. There aren't any other female zodiac signs, only Virgo.
Okay, well then, That only female Virgo sign should have got what should have been a blessing.
I'm not getting into that. That wasn't on me. That was on Moses.
You are blessed, sister. Don't worry.
Thank you, Julie.
And
We're
again,
gonna bless you.
we're not accepting these zodiac things because that's pagan and unbiblical. I'm just showing you that some people say that the zodiac can be found in the Bible, and there's an argument to be made for that. You can see some of that based on what I showed there, but you can also see that it falls apart in some cases, like Issachar and Benjamin specifically. They don't make any sense. The rest of them, you can make some kind of sense out of their associations, but those two, you really can't. That's why I say it almost looks like after they had connected up all the ones that they could, they had two left over. They said, okay, you two guys get what's left because we don't know what to do with you. Now, the next column, and this isn't about creation, but since we asked about the blessings and the curses, the next column over is in Revelation. The thing is that all 12 in the book of Revelation, it talks about God putting his seal on 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, but the 12 tribes that are listed there are not the same as the 12 tribes that are listed in the book of Genesis. So for example, you'll see most of them are there, but the one that disappears is Dan. Dan is not listed in the book of Revelation. But what is listed is you have both Joseph and Manasseh. Not Ephraim and Manasseh, but Joseph and Manasseh. So you take the tribe of Dan and you replace it with one of the half tribes that come out of Joseph, and you still count Joseph as a tribe. Now, what that means, I'm not sure, but I have a speculation. You have to get my book on the book of Revelation to know that. But we'll get there when we start talking about eschatology in the book of Revelation. I'll tell you what I think it means.
Oh, Lord.
It's based on what the names Dan and Manasseh mean. Okay, so we've gone through the zodiac, and it is 6:48, so that's all we're going to get to do for tonight. Anybody have any questions, comments? Oh, if you've got the book, there's a lot of stuff here talking about why we shouldn't follow the zodiac right after the zodiac discussion. But we'll start up again on verse 17 because we still haven't gotten out of day 4 yet. It's still day 4. So we'll finish that up next week. Would anybody have any questions, comments on anything we talked about tonight or last week or before, or anything that happened to you this week, anything you heard, saw, read, discussed that you want to share? Anybody? Nothing? Okay, so we can get out of here then 10 minutes early. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to ask, well, Julia, you're right underneath me on my screen. Close us out in prayer tonight, Julia. Only because you're next in line below me on my screen.
Can he hear you?
Can you hear me, Julia? Oh, you're muted.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
You want me to close out in prayer?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were talking to the deacon.
No, talking to you. You're the next person in line on my screen.
You know, I don't understand why I'm always at the top of everybody's screen.
Because you sign in early.
Oh, man.
Now you're gonna make a sign in later.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation tonight, my dear cousin.
You're welcome.
Let us pray. Father God, we're just truly thankful for this opportunity that you have presented for us today. And Lord, we just ask that you continue to watch over us, that you bless each and every household that's represented on the Zoom call this evening. And you know what each one of us stand in need of. And we just ask that you look down upon us, that first of all, you forgive us for all of our transgressions, anything that we've said or done that has caused hurt feelings or misinterpretations. Father, we just ask forgiveness of it all. Lord,